Welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the law firm of Abercrombie and Sanchez, PLLC. You can find us on the internet at astxlegal.com or by calling 1-888-981-7509. Your hosts are Bryan Abercrombie and Samuel Sanchez. Bryan has been practicing law for 18 years and is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in the area of family law. Sam has been practicing for 13 years, is licensed in both Texas and Florida, and is a certified mediator. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and all views are the opinion of the hosts. It is not designed to provide legal advice for your particular legal matter, and it should not replace the advice of competent counsel. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. I'm your host, Bryan Abercrombie, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, the chocolate syrup to my vanilla ice cream, Sam Sanchez.
Oh, I'm all about the banana split, man. I'm actually the whipped topping.
Okay, whatever. Whatever you want to be, my friend. Today, we've brought on a special guest. Her name is Stephanie Quade. She is a very close friend of mine for at least 26 years. So we brought her on today to talk about special needs children and special needs in divorces. And she's got some very, very personal experience with that. And she's got some educational background that can help us navigate through all of this as well. But before we get started, let's talk about our famous fun topic that we always talk about every time in the celebrity divorce realm. So what I had on my plate today was the Kim Kardashian Kanye West divorce. Well, I guess it's not necessarily a divorce yet. It's a pre-divorce. They're preparing to be divorced. They're thinking about it.
I think in Hollywood that's called a divorce.
They're pre-divorced. They're preparing to be divorced. So just something like
their agents are not talking anymore.
For that kind of a situation, you're talking about, two people that one had an empire on one side and the other one had an empire on the other side. And of course, they obviously got married. They have some, number of children and, some mental health issues. You've got all kinds of, things in that case.
Yeah, I mean, $1 billion, over $1 billion in assets. I mean, you're talking about somebody who lawyers are going to spend a lot of time. I doubt this ever sees court. But it's interesting because, with special needs within the individual, obviously Kanye having some emotional issues, sometimes heavily medicated, he leads a different kind of lifestyle than I think Kim, is she gone back to law school? Did she get her law degree? Is she in the process of doing it? Something like that?
She's apprenticing to be a lawyer. I think she's doing it the old fashioned way, which reading the law, studying under a lawyer. She's doing all that kind of stuff, which is, how Abraham Lincoln used to do it, I guess, right? They had to study under a lawyer. And yeah. And Stephanie, you got any comments on the Kim and Kanye divorce?
I think they're just doing it for the money. I mean, I don't think they'll really get divorced. I think they're always doing, things for publicity and stuff. But who knows?
Who knows?
That's not
all press is good press.
Right.
Right.
He's up in Montana. She's down in Beverly Hills or Calabasas or wherever she lives, wherever all the rich folk in California live. And we don't know. We don't know whether they're it's just a publicity scheme or whether they're actually in Splitsville. But yeah, that'll be an interesting divorce. We'll probably spend some time talking about it. But on to the topic du jour. So special needs in a divorce case. So Sam, what do you think?
Gosh,
you're getting a divorce, you got a child with special needs, and keep in mind, special needs children, can range a run of, there's some very minor special needs, like say a learning disability or, reading disability or some kind of physical disability where they can, still do most of the things normal children can do, but they need some special help, up to a more severe situation where there might be a child that requires lifetime care. So Sam, your thoughts?
Well, I think it definitely adds a level of complexity as you go through the divorce process. And I think it requires a substantial amount of planning and insight to really kind of do that well. Because First of all, it's not cookie cutter, right? When we talk about cookie cutter divorces, we're talking about divorce decrees that are very basic. They can be, somebody goes to a legal Zoom and says, I don't own any property and I don't have any kids and I want to get divorced. Can you do that? Sure. What we're talking about is really custom provisions, very thoughtful. A well-crafted decree is required, I think, absolutely necessary when you're going through a divorce, even in the divorce process, for parents of special needs children.
And Stephanie, the reason we brought her on is she's got some education. You have a master's degree in special education, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then in addition, she has a special needs son named Preston, who's a darling child. And he's not such a child anymore. He's a teenager now. But
he's a man now.
he's almost a man now. He's pretty close, right? But she's had very specific challenges with Preston, over the years. And so she's, kind of gives us a real world firsthand example of kind of, the different challenges that she faces on a daily basis, and, the different kind of workarounds that she has to do, and the stuff that you have to think about, if you're a parent going through a situation then you have a special needs child. And now keep in mind that not all special needs are severe. There are some, minor things like, that don't require a lot of care, like, stuff that the school system can fix. I don't want to say fix, but so stuff that the school system can take care of. And that, when you're talking about a divorce, you're talking about legally, dividing up those rights. You're talking about one parent having the right to make, one or both parents having the right to make an education decision or a medical decision or a psychiatric, psychological decision, at least in Texas anyway. And that is where a lot of times people don't even think about those rights. They just say, oh, we'll make those decisions when they come up. And, when you have normal, healthy children, that's probably pretty easy to do. But when you have a special needs child, education decisions, for example, could be huge.
Yeah, absolutely, Bryan. And, the big thing that I try to tell clients, we've said this on the podcast before, divorce is like two railroad tracks that run parallel to one another, right? One is going to deal with the property that you've acquired and what you do there. But the other track is really going to deal with your children. And within that particular track, when you're talking about special needs children, there's really avenues that you have to address fundamentally differently. And there's conservatorship and there's possession and access. So time with the children and how you make decisions with the children. And I think both of them require really some pretty astute and intensive kind of thought-provoking consideration before you come up with an order, whether it's a temporary order, but especially before you come up with the final decree, because you're going through, and I'm sure Stephanie can kind of give us some insight in there, but you're going through issues that maybe most parents don't, and you really have to think about on a daily basis, on a short-term and long-term basis, like what does this order need to look like so that we can function together at a high level as co-parents.
So Stephanie, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, I have so much experience with this. I think when I was going through my divorce, it's been 10 years. Preston was only 7, so he was really young then. But I think we didn't think enough about, all the things that were going to happen when we split, as far as like he was still in therapy. Preston has autism, so he was getting ABA therapy, and we had people coming in for occupational therapy and all of these things to both houses. And I guess when we got divorced, we didn't have, my attorney didn't sit down and like talk about all these different things with us, as to even just financial things. Like, Preston has special food and there are a lot of extra expenses, and even the therapy expenses, a lot of those got cut out because they weren't covered. But then even just from the therapist going back and forth between the homes, like we just didn't talk about a lot of this stuff because there are so many things that are happening. There's a lot of trauma when you're going through a divorce and you're trying to figure out, how do I save my home, and who's going to get what stuff, and you're not thinking about, here's a special needs child and how do we make these decisions for them for now
and just so kind of people understand, I mean, what kind of, I don't want to get too personal, but what kind of strain do you think that kind of a special needs child, what kind of strains do you think that puts on, a relationship, one, and then two, whenever you're separating and divorcing, what kind of a strain does it put on, put on the situation, at that point?
it's an enormous strain. It's very different than having a typically developing child, because I think there's just a lot of black and white. I have another son, Reagan, who's 15 and was just 5 when we divorced, and I felt like things with him were pretty black and white. And but with Preston, there are a million different moving parts, and there still is. I mean,
Sure.
There's a lot of, there's all these decisions with school. And
let's talk about those for a second. I mean, obviously, I've got a daughter that has some special needs too, not near to your level, but we have alphabet meetings, we have 504s, we have all kinds of alphabet plans, we have all kinds of school officials that we're talking to, on a semi-annual basis, I guess, and different plans that we're trying to put in place. I mean, what does that look like on a daily basis?
It's interesting. You have a yearly ARD meeting if you have a child with special needs. Even if they're just learning disabled, you have a yearly ARD. And then you have an IEP, which is an individual education plan for each child. And, when you're married, I always made all of those decisions and helped write goals because I was a teacher, teaching special ed at the time. But then you have to decide who gets to help make those decisions when you're in an IEP meeting, because the teachers write the goals, but the parents are there to sign off, like who's going to attend the meeting. And there has to be a lot of communication between the parents when they're living separately as to, when are these things happening and who's going to be there. And I pre-write stuff. Yeah, I share stuff with their dad because, communication wise, as far as this is what we're thinking about doing, because we're in 2 separate houses, so there's not a whole lot of chit chat about it. And then also, I think this is so important, but we have a journal and have for years a communication journal that goes from back and forth from school. And I put that in place years ago. And there's just any behavior stuff goes in there, food changes, things that we've noticed with Preston, but even just ARD meetings and remember this is coming up or whatever, that all goes in this communication journal. And then the teachers too, everything's sort of fluid with everybody, the teachers, and then these 2 parents, the administrators even, and everybody kind of knows what's going on, so that there's one thing where we can all kind of communicate. And I think that's
this is where Texas law kind of, it gives in a joint managing conservatorship, it gives one parent or the other parent the right to make an education decision, or it can be a joint right, or it can be an independent right. This is where that right becomes, a huge issue, because somebody has to sign, like you said, somebody has to sign off on that plan, and somebody has to attend the meeting. Somebody has to sign off on the plan. Everybody, typically under a joint managing conservatorship, everybody has the right to participate and get information. But oftentimes, if you have 2 parents that are completely at odds and can't communicate, then the court's going to probably give one person or the other person the right to make the decision. In the event there's a joint decision, what do you do for a tiebreaker? Who's the tiebreaker? Is it a doctor? Is it a psychologist? Is it some kind of educational professional? Who breaks the tie? Do you have to go back to court every time? Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I've litigated that issue a couple of times over the years, and I would tell you there's no clear-cut, easy answers for parents. And judges are in a tough spot because, most of the time when you go into court, it's because both parents love their kids. It's not because they hate them, right? It's because they both feel like they're right. And in a situation where you have a special needs child, those situations get even more complicated, because I'll tell most clients who come in have, their children are fine, they're healthy, no special needs. And I'll say, okay, well, these rights that we're talking about, where you're talking about, Bryan, these joint conservatorship rights, the right to make educational decisions, medical decisions, psychological, invasive dental, all these kinds of things, they just don't come up a lot. But when you have a special needs child, unfortunately, it seems like they do come up a lot. And they become, this hyper situation where parents are now already estranged because they're going through the divorce process. Even if you're the best of friends, there's still that tension. And then now you've got a situation to where, you have a different perspective on what's going to be best for your child. I've taken it. Judges have, come out and said, we're going to use, an independent third neutral party who doesn't have a dog in the fight, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists who are going to weigh in. But even then, it's still up to the judge. So you could, then you get an opinion you don't like. What ends up happening, Brian? We go and hire our own expert, right? We go and we say,
Right.
hey, well, here's the contradicting opinion that you need to take into account. So it's a really difficult situation that I don't envy for parents, especially if you don't have a good co-parenting relationship. Stephanie, how was that relationship for you? I mean, like at the inception of the divorce, I guess, like, our listeners who kind of tune into this will be thinking, well, maybe I'm contemplating going through that process. I have a special needs child. What did you think of? And then also as a follow-up to that is like, post-divorce, what do you look back and say, like, gosh, if I'd have only known I'd have put this in place right away and it'd have saved me headaches?
Yes. I wish I'd known a lot of things back then. Because again, you're not thinking, you're kind of scattered. And then when you have young children, you're in the middle of being a parent to these little children too. I really wish I had thought more about all the ins and outs of all the special needs staff. We even find the financial, even as far as child support and all of that, just didn't get factored in as to all the expenses that Preston has. And then too, it gets there's kind of some gray area there when it comes to therapies and things that, like you said, one parent might think that this is important and the other parent thinks that it's frivolous and we shouldn't spend money on chiropractic or we shouldn't spend money on supplements. And I just wish that there was more, that we had sat down more and talked about it before, so that we could have been on the same page. But I mean, the communication, it depends on, with my ex-husband, it's hit or miss. Sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's not so good. I've learned how to communicate with him better than I used to, but I wish a whole part of the process was sitting down with our attorney. And I also wish, because I have an advocate now that helps work with me, especially since Preston's about to be 18. We didn't make any of those decisions for what happens to him after he's 18. There's none of that is in my decree. We didn't discuss it at all. Basically, when he turns 18, I mean, is everything just going to stop paying? I don't know. And so we're going to say that again.
I'm sorry. No, I was just saying, Stephanie, and that you've raised that point a couple of times, and I would tell you that's probably the number one issue that I think gets litigated through this process for attorneys and that is under considered. Exactly what you're talking about, the financial impact. Yeah. Because in Texas, I mean, like, so obviously most parents don't know that in Texas and in Florida, that can affect child support. So the thresholds, the statutory amounts that are created in Texas are designed based on typically a 60-40 split in time, but it doesn't anticipate special needs. It doesn't anticipate additional costs. And you can absolutely go above guidelines for those types of issues. You can also say, hey, you know what, in a decree, we know while our child is amazing and he's not completely self-sufficient. So it's going to be lifetime support. These are things that can absolutely be contemplated for both parents.
Yeah, he'll be with me for forever. And so, I think it's important to have an attorney that understands special needs law and also maybe having an advocate that works with the attorney, because I know that my advocate opened my eyes to lots of things that I had no idea, even funds that I had access to, or things that he said, man, you could have done this, before and had help or had respite, because he's not independent. He has to have somebody with him all the time. And I work and have a business and, I just paid out of pocket for everything. I didn't realize that there might be some help out there. And also even just with the school system, the advocate helped me to make some decisions for him.
So when you have divorcing parents, and what kind of, commonalities do you think are good, or like common rules at the various households, common, plans of action? What kinds of things do you think? We're not talking about necessarily your situation. Let's talk about the quote unquote perfect world. You have two divorcing parents. Let's say they're getting along. What kinds of things do you think are good for them to do if they have a special needs? Say they have a severely special needs child who needs a lot of help. What kinds of things would be, from your personal experience, what kind of things would be good for them to do? Communication wise, consistency wise, all that stuff.
Yeah, having consistency at home, and that means with a schedule. Communicating bedtime. Bedtime is such a huge thing, no matter what age they are, but for special needs too, because they're often overwhelmed and have sensory issues and they get tired. Just having those same bedtimes, same time to wake up, some of the same routines, even having things at one house and having it at the other house too. So if they have like sensory things or a weighted vest or weighted blankets at one house that they might need for something, they then might have it at the other house. We've done a pretty good job of communicating that kind of stuff and having it be similar over there than it is at my house. But I think that's really important to have it not be a shock at completely different at one house than the other. And then
let's talk about. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No. I don't. You're on
No,
a roll.
I was going to say because a lot of kids with special needs have behavior challenges, and I have worked a lot with kids with behavior challenges, and in home and in schools. And I just think it's so important, the consistency of how it's handled, and when a behavior comes up, how is it handled? What are you saying to the child, and what is the consequence, or how do you prevent it? And doing it across homes, or else the child gets, and I've seen this in a lot of families that I've worked with actually from divorced homes, they're confused. They're not sure what they can get away with or what, and so then the behaviors escalate. And I think that's a huge thing for kids like Preston, who can go there and have behaviors, and they might play one house more than the other. Maybe there's not consistency. So I think that's really important.
Okay. And then let's jump into like the other huge decision, that's involved in this joint managing conservatorship that we're talking about is and I'll kind of lump them together, Sam, so we can kind of talk about, in the interest of time, kind of talk about them all. The medical decisions and the psychiatric decisions. I mean, those things are also crucial. I mean, depending on the level, like I said, the level of severity on a special needs child, some of them have, medical, severe medical issues. Some of them don't. Some of them have more psychiatric or psychological issues that need to be addressed. But, talk to us a little bit about the legal aspect of that, Sam.
Yeah. I think that what parents really need to understand and comprehend is when you're talking about conservatorship with special needs children, it really is far reaching. It can be as simple as, dental care. I'll give you an example. I represented a client, child had spinal bifida. And, one, they had to contemplate, how do we do this? So wisdom teeth were coming in, abscess tooth, infection. Now we're going to have to go do oral surgery. Who do we use? I want to go to just a dentist. I want to go to an oral surgeon. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's simple decisions that can really balloon into really complex situations for parents. And these rights are far reaching. So you really need to spend some time with an attorney who knows what they're doing to kind of explain these to you so that you understand what each element of the conservatorship package that we're talking about right now, these rights and duties, how it really affects your child, how it affects the relationship potentially between these two parents relating to this child. And that's really what I would advise most people to do. If you have a special needs child, you're contemplating divorce, you're in a divorce, you're post-divorce and things aren't working out, like sit down with somebody who can really help explain to you what these are and how they can work. Because while they're written in law, the foundation of our family law is contract law, right? So you can still, between good parents, come up with a very creative solution in an order that is enforceable, that will help both parents and give them structure and guidance for that child as they go forward.
And the one good thing from a legal standpoint is, you're talking about medical decisions and psychiatric, psychological decisions. You've got a medical professional there. Let's say you need a tiebreaker, on a medical decision, that two parents can absolutely say, yes, if we can't agree, this medical professional is going to be the one to make the tie-breaking call. So, you can, in the area of contract that away and say, okay, we're going to have this medical doctor or this psychologist or a psychiatrist make this call if we can't come to an agreement on it. And I think, that's the one thing that's different from the educational aspect of it. A lot of times you'll have school districts that, no, we don't want to get involved. We don't want to get involved. But absolutely, a medical professional can make a decision, that they believe is best for a child.
Absolutely. And I guess, along Stephanie's financial piece, the other piece I would add to that, Bryan, is, really contemplate for parents, especially in Texas, but Florida as well, is before those children turn 18 and get to the point where they're potentially emancipating from you, really evaluate the financial position that you're in relation to child support, because you need to get into court and have a court contemplate that child support obligation go forward post 18 before they turn 18. It's much more difficult of a conversation I found in court to come back in after a child is 18, potentially maybe they're in a special needs program that's like a college or junior college, but they're still living at home. And so that obligation remains with one parent. But guess what? Now there's not a possession and access schedule. Now there's not a child support schedule to go forward. There's not a really split down for those expenses, continuation of healthcare coverage. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I would just really encourage people to kind of contemplate that, both as they're planning for divorce while they're in divorce. And then if you're getting to that age and you've got an old decree, really sit down with a licensed, qualified professional to give you some advice about what you can do to keep that going.
Hey, Stephanie, what has been your kind of experience with, medical, psychiatric, psychological decision-making? Has that been a tough road, or is that a little bit easier, or kind of how does that work?
Sometimes it's been tough sometimes. I think it's tough. I think he and I have very different ideas about treatments and stuff like that medically. So yeah, we've run into some hiccups. I think I can say this, but I think it's an important thing to bring up, is that they have a stepmom and they have a stepdad now, and that the stepmom has, tries to make medical decisions, but really, and educational, also has met with the school and different things that I think it's important that that's addressed, because really she doesn't have rights to do that. But that's been kind of our challenge is other people making decisions, stepmom making decisions. But as far as medically, I mean, we don't go to the doctor all the time or anything like that. But I mean, it's been pretty civil with us, I guess. I make most of the decisions with both of them. So.
I mean, and is that normal? I mean, is it normally default to one parent just has to kind of do it because, he's in your house more, they have the child more, or they're more in tune with what's going on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I'm more in tune to what Preston needs, and when he's had therapies before, when we saw biomedical doctors for him for years, I was the one that made all those decisions. So anything that we've done since being divorced, most of the time I make those decisions, but I run it by him and make sure that, I'm thinking about doing this. Are you on board? We're doing red light therapy right now. I ran it by him before I put him in the red light bed. just sort of as a courtesy. I mean,
Sure.
It's courteous. It's, hey, this isn't going to harm him. It's a red light bed, but it is a treatment. And so we talk about it, and things like that. So,
and is it important to kind of be on board and kind of have the same treatment? If you're going to have a treatment regimen where, say, medication has to be administered,
yeah,
I'm assuming it's important to have the same, things like giving the medication at the same time every day, or, at both houses, and all of that, and all the communication back and forth on how they're reacting to the medication and if it has to be changed, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's where I think the journal is important. The communication is important. And even if it's supplements, CBD oil or whatever, you can have, the school will say, oh, he's super hyper on these days, but not on these days. And just keeping the, understanding it's because he's going from one house to another and it's not being done at the other house. So
I think it's fair to say that it's probably best for two parents who are divorcing to have a special needs child to maybe try to be bigger people and put those petty things aside, because it really is a super challenge, and you have to be an adult on a different level to be able to, navigate that with the other person.
Exactly. I always said, I'll take the high road every time. And you just have to. It's the child first. My kids come first, their needs, and all this bickering and who's right and who's wrong isn't important anymore.
And let's talk a little bit about the other child. I mean, obviously you have a child who's, you know, fairly atypical of children at his particular age. I mean, how does a special needs child impact with other siblings? You know, because obviously there's so much attention that, you know, has to be devoted to the special needs child just because. I mean, that's just unfortunately the life. So how does that kind of thing impact a normal child?
Yeah, I actually asked my son about this morning, Reagan, on the way to school. And he said he felt like it's hard for him. You know, Preston gets a lot of attention. He has a lot of needs. He's loud. Sure. So Reagan always says, he's very noisy, Mom. He's noisy all the time. It's very challenging.
Brian's the same way.
Yeah, I am the same way.
The people are just noisy, but he's happy. He's just noisy. But I think it's important to acknowledge that child's feelings, to get therapy for them. If I mean, he's 15, he's amazing. He's a musician. He's an actor, but he gets therapy, and he loves it. It's an amazing person who's been a great mentor to him, and he can talk to him about things that, you know, and just and move forward with things and cope, but also just having one-on-one time with the neurotypical child. I've taken him on trips. I try to take him on dates. And I try to communicate too with his dad to do the same. And, you know, he also gets time with my dad. So just trying to get that individual time where he's not, you know, because we have to manage Preston all the time. And Reagan gets kind of, you know, he's so good that he just kind of goes along.
Because I kind of see it as you have two parents that are divorcing. So obviously that's a trauma for a child, for any child. Then you have a special needs child who requires a lot of attention. And then, you know, you compound the, you know, the amount of traumas that are involving a child, an innocent, you know, a child who's, you know, fairly typical. And, you know, does that child feel left out? Does, you know, what's the, you know, what are the kinds of things you have to do? And, you know, that child's world's crumbling too when two parents get a divorce. So what, you know, what kind of things are, you know, from your experience, like what kinds of things are important if, you know, if you have a young child and you're going through this, you know, what do you tell that child?
Yeah, I was always really honest with Reagan, but, and very upfront with him, and he can tell his feelings to me. I never hushed him, like, we don't talk about that. We're just moving on. I mean, we try to move on, and I try to keep things super positive, but I listen to him too whenever, I mean, every once in a while he'll have a moment where he says it's not fair. This just is, you know, I come from divorced parents and I have a special needs brother, and I just let him have those feelings. I also keep in mind, I think this is one of the most important things to say today too, is like not to badmouth the other parent, and to, you know, I don't talk about his dad to him. I will talk honestly with him, but I'm not going to badmouth him, and I'm not going to tell him how terrible his father is and all of these different things. I try not to highlight that, but I also let him have a voice. If he's upset with his dad, I let him say that, and I listen and I honor those feelings. And then I also, like I said, he has therapy where he can talk to a person who's not involved and who can look at everything and help him to cope. I think it's,
So let's talk about the situation, just jumping a little bit. Let's talk about the situation. We touched on this before about a child who's reaching, you know, adulthood, who has a, you know, say a special need that's going to require full-time care. Sam, because I've litigated these issues too, and, you know, it becomes, you know, one that, you know, I found that a lot of people start forgetting that this support, this child support is for a child, you know, that's never going to be, that you have a responsibility to take care of, that's never going to be, you know, an adult member of society the way that an adult goes out and gets a job and has a household and has a family and all of that kind of stuff. That child is going to require care, you know, full-time care for the rest of his or her life. And, you know, I've often found that in litigating these things that gets lost. Oh, she's just trying to take me for more money and get me paying for the rest of my life and this and that and all of that. And it, even the amount of child support that's ordered typically doesn't cover, you know, if you have to leave a job to take care of a full-time care of an adult, of an adult child that can't take care of him or herself, that's a hotly litigated issue, because yes, there are some federal Social Security and different things that you could potentially get, that kind of offset those things. But what does that care look like, long term after 18? Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brian. And the big concern that I always have for parents, and, not just with special needs children, but especially for special needs children, is, when you talk about healthcare costs of any kind, whether it be for counseling, whether you're going to talk about, medical care, whether it's going to be continuing, therapy, physical therapy, there's a big price tag to that. And child support, as you and I both know, it's the minimum amount that you're supposed to pay. Right. So the state came up and said no less than this is required for basically lights to stay on and groceries maybe to be in the refrigerator. It's not designed to help parents be able to navigate children's needs who have special needs, whether it be medical needs, psychological needs, physical needs. I mean, any of those things are going to add tremendous amounts of pressure and stress on that parent. And the big part of it too, Brian, is what I try to tell clients that I've litigated these issues with is I want the order to be representative of your relationship. I think that's the cleanest way that I can paint a picture for a client, is to say whatever your roles are, however you guys relate. So to Stephanie's point, if you're the person who does the majority of the decisions, who does the majority of the work, and there's the other parent who, yeah, they pay money, but they're kind of like the Disney dad or mom, that's fine. Everybody has a role. We kind of follow those, when we fall into a relationship. That should be cemented in an order, both thinking about it like, how do we make decisions for these children, but also the financial implications of that. Because this case that I was talking about, this child had spinal bifida. He was spina bifida. He was going to be in his wheelchair for life. He was going to have care for life. He was high functioning, really smart kid, but there was no way he could provide for his own care. So he was going to be with one of those parents. But one of those parents absolutely did 90% of the time and care. The other parent was basically just paying funds. And so, when we got to the courthouse, it was really easy to see that this other individual was like, well, I don't want to be paying this big price tag, which could get bigger, right, as a special needs child, because who knows what happens as that child continues to age and grow, what issues may come up. They're thinking, well, 18 is when most people stop paying for that. Well, no, this child is going to be with the parent for the rest of their lives. That means healthcare coverage. That means, co-pays. That means medication. That means therapy. That means counseling. Yeah.
It also means potential guardianship, because you have an adult that you may have to make decisions for. So who's going to be the guardian of that child? And you may have to go through a guardianship proceeding. That's, another piece to the puzzle that has to be discussed. And, there's not really visitation orders after 18, but I mean, if you have a child that, that has severe special needs, I mean, that could have to be contemplated.
Yeah, absolutely. And, judges look at that and they're like, hey, well, it's a very complicated conversation to have with parents, I would imagine, Stephanie, because you're contemplating this going forward. You're looking at it saying, how do we navigate this going forward? Because if a parent checks out, you're 100% on.
That's exactly what's happening right now. Exactly what's happening right now. Preston turns 18 in September, and there's nothing written for what happens after he turns 18. And two, I think you mentioned this, Sam, but kids, they're supposed to be able to be in public school till they're 21. Now that it's changed a little bit as they're trying to graduate them out. Preston will probably go one extra year, but he'll still be in school when he's 18 and 19 in the public school. And so I think sometimes it gets a little bit gray because parents will forget, they go, oh, well, they're in, things will just stay the same until they turn 18. And then all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, what happened?
Yep.
Which is why I'm seeing an advocate next month. And then of course we'll end up, I'm glad that we're doing this because this is helping me today. I'm thinking about, it's making me think about these things even deeper. And legally it has to be.
As a parent, what do you think parents should think about in this particular situation?
Oh my gosh.
Obviously you have some real first world experience. So.
Yeah, I mean, the financial needs of the child, like he said, it's expensive. I mean, it's expensive to have any child, but the special food, clothes, all those expenses. And two, I don't know, Bryan, what you said about the possession time, if you can write that in there. But I mean, he spends, he sees his dad one weekend a month and then every Thursday and Friday night. I don't know if that's something that can continue, or if both of us agreed on it, maybe it could continue. I'm not sure what a judge would decide on something like that for after 18. But
I mean, a lot of times that depends on the child, and it depends on the need, and it depends on the the functioning level of the child. I mean, there's so many. When you get past the age of 18, they don't have obviously you're dealing with what our society is deemed as an adult. So you have to take their rights into consideration as well, and say, okay, does one parent need to get a guardianship of this child potentially, because decisions are going to have to be made that this child can't make for himself or herself, and that becomes a real deal. And then the guardian would then the court can make certain determinations on say a guardian, let's say an adult guardianship. The court can make certain determinations like, hey, you're going to live in this facility, or you're going to live with this person, or this person's going to be the guardian of the estate. This person's going to be the guardian of the person, and make all the medical, financial, or medical and educational and all those types of decisions. So there's a whole nother element that comes into this thing that makes it a little bit more tricky, because like I said, you have to take into account that child's rights as well, because that child is no longer a child. That child is an adult, and that child has his or her own rights. And the court is always going for the least restrictive alternative. I mean, that's something that you'll hear judges say time and time again. What's the least restrictive alternative we can give this particular child or person under a guardianship, so they can live as normal a life as possible and get the help that they need. So that's the tricky balancing point that's often litigated.
Yeah, and I have a question. Can I say something?
Absolutely. You can say anything you want.
This might be helpful for somebody that's where I was 10 years ago, which is making decisions after 18 something that you recommend people do when you're first writing the decree? Or is that something, because basically what they said to me was, my attorney said, we'll address this later. And that's what was said. Literally, we will address this later. And we never spoke a word of it. So I don't know exactly how you guys do that, but that might be helpful to somebody who has younger children that's not thinking about that. But is it something that
I would tell you that yes, you try to resolve as much of that as you possibly can. However, obviously you have to take into account, and judges, at least in my experience, oftentimes judges don't necessarily tackle what's going to happen at 18. They'll say, okay, we'll deal with that. Especially let's say you're getting divorced at 7 or 8 years old. They'll say, okay, well, you have 10 years and you can come back later and we'll deal with it at that time, because everything may have changed by then. And also, like I said, it also depends on the special need and the severity of it, and what kind of treatment or what the progression of this individual child is going to be, because obviously some children make super strides and they're way far along, and then some don't ever make any strides. Every kiddo is different. So it's hard, because you really got to look at, this is where you really got to sit down with your attorney and look at, okay, what are the specific issues? What's the medical, kind of diagnosis? What's the, how do I feel about this? What do I feel like is the most important things to advocate for at this particular moment in time? And then what are the things that can wait till later? Because it's hard. It's just, it's the unknown future, right? I don't know that any lawyer could give you super advice. I think you try to lock down as much as you possibly can of what of what the absolute known things are. You try to lock down as much as you can. But in a lot of instances, either you have an unwilling other party that's not willing to work with those things. Sometimes you have and you have to get the case finalized at some point. And sometimes you can't resolve those things. Sometimes those things are kicked down the road a little bit. Sam, what do you think? You might have a different perspective than I do.
No, I feel like I'm kind of in the same boat. The only thing I would tell you is it's been helpful in my experience to bring in an expert, right? So really having somebody who understands care, concern, treatment, evolution of those special needs, whatever they may be, bring them into the process. Either bring them in as your expert, or if you're going to try to like do more of a like collaborative process, bring them in for both parties to hear from this neutral person who has experience long-term with these types of situations to say, hey guys, you know, when he turns 15, hormones affect him differently. When he turns 18, he's not going to be able to drive. So, you know, you have to contemplate like where, you know, all these kinds of things they can tell you. I mean, you know, like if I asked you, Stephanie, as you know, a master's degree in early education, I'm sure you'd tell me, yeah, well, here's the natural evolution of things that you should kind of contemplate. Having that type of expertise in the conversation early is really important because it'll help you think through a creative order. Really try to stay away from cookie cutter is the other piece. I mean, really spend some time with your lawyer crafting a custom divorce decree that can grow with you, because, you know, that can be a living, breathing document if it's done correctly. And it'll save you time and money of having to come back into court to do it again later.
Right.
Plus you want to get that finding. Plus you want to get that finding from the court that this child is a child with special needs, and those special needs may require changes as we go down the road.
Absolutely. And that's where I was going to go. I was going to say, anticipate litigation. That'd be the other piece, is really, you should tell your lawyer, like, okay, so, you know, I like him. He's okay. We're getting divorced, but, you know, what if he marries the worst person in the world who wants to try to insert herself and make decisions, or hates my guts and doesn't want to do anything, doesn't believe in medication, doesn't believe in vaccinations, whatever it may be. You know, like, try to anticipate worst case scenario and include provisions in that. And I think it's tremendously helpful to have a better order. There's no such thing as a perfect order. You may still have to come back to court, but make sure you do that before that child turns 18. If you're going to contemplate these things, whether it's going to the probate court to consider guardianship, or you're coming back in to modify child support to try to get it to be, you know, a carryover to lifetime. I mean, you know, these expenses unpaid, don't let it get to the point where they've matured, they're considered an adult. It just changes the conversation.
It's it increases the complexity too by a large margin. So Stephanie, let's talk a little bit about you personally. Obviously, tell us a little bit about your business and what you do.
I taught school actually for off and on for 20 years, and a lot of behavior units, and then I did in-home therapy with kids, and then I kind of went off and became a life coach. And so I'm a vision coach. I do a lot of workshops. I work one-on-one with people. I've worked with businesses on developing vision. I also do, I have a healing room now in my house. And so I do aroma touch massage and some other healing mechanisms and I've actually worked a lot with families of special needs, moms, in my coaching and in the healing aspect of it. But yeah, and I do essential oils. I think they're really important for calming kids.
So if somebody wants to talk to you about something professionally, how do they get in touch with you?
I'm on Facebook. It's Stephanie Daniels Quade is a good way to get a hold of me. A lot of people do it that way. Bliss Coaching and Healing is the name of my business. I'm kind of revamping it right now because I just changed the name. But it'll be launched, probably the new website, in the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay, it's me and Sam will be contacting because we need a vision, and we need some life coaching.
Yeah,
ourselves.
Definitely need life coaching.
It's important to have vision.
So, Sam, for us, Sam, tell us where you are. You're in Fort Worth. What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Best way to get a hold of me is you can reach our office at 469-844-7181. If you want to reach out to me directly, my number is 817-914-5470. You can shoot me an email. I'm usually pretty good about getting back to you that way at sanchez@astxlegal.com.
And yes, I'm the same. We're at astxlegal.com. My phone number is 281-374-4741. You can reach me on my cell phone at 214-724-6106. We're pretty accessible. We are happy to help you out with your legal questions. And Stephanie, I wanted to thank you so much for agreeing to come on with us. I think this was an awesome segment that we can really, really help a lot of people. So I really appreciate your time.
I hope so. I appreciate both of you. Bryan has given me amazing advice over the past many, many years. So
he's pretty good. We'll keep him around. He's pretty good.
You.
I was calculating a little bit this morning on how long I've known you, and it's been almost 30 years. I can't believe it's been that long.
I can't believe it. It's crazy.
Y'all grew up together at 2-year-olds, apparently.
Yes. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
When I was an infant.
So anyway, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I mean, I think people are going to get a lot of benefit. I mean, you have such a good first world, experience dealing with this. And I think your life experience can help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Yes, you're so welcome. Anytime. Appreciate it.
You guys take care.
Thank
All right.
you.
Well, thank you for coming on today. That is it for us, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the Top Texas Lawyers podcast. If you would like a consultation with either Bryan or Sam, please call 1-888-981-7509 or visit us on the web at astxlegal.com. Once again, that's astxlegal.com. Thank you very much.